Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And Spring Training 2039 is just underway. Welcome back. I know it's been a few days since our last episode. Things have gotten very busy for me at work and a little busier than normal at home. So the pace of videos over the next month or so is likely to be somewhat slower than it has been over the length of this series, but still plan on trying to put out several videos a week. And this upcoming week, Thanksgiving in the United States, probably will have time to put out a few more when I hopefully do take some time off to enjoy with family. So I am still out there. I am still eagerly trying to manage this Oakland A's team. And in this upcoming season, after we get through spring training, we will be going for back-to-back championships and trying to win for the third time in 4 seasons. Don't feel like there is a ton up for debate in spring training this year. If I think about the 12th and 13th pitcher on the roster, that might be up in debate. Maybe a second utility infielder could have a surprise, and maybe our 5th outfielder could be a surprise when all is said and done. But I don't think, barring some significant injuries, that there's going to be any major surprises on our team a month from now when we get through spring training and have to make the decisions on the 26 players who will be coming north with us to Oakland. And unfortunately, we have suffered a significant injury in spring training. It involves the franchise, Jake Ortega, going to be out for 5 weeks with chronic back soreness. The positive thing is it's March 1st, so he's likely only to miss the first week to 10 days of the regular season after he goes through a rehab assignment in AAA, hopefully in early April. But this is definitely the fear with the franchise, who has been an incredible player for us over the years. He's now wrecked as far as his injury proneness. We have definitely benefited greatly from the very aggressive contract we gave him 7 years ago when he was basically completely unproven as a major leaguer. Have him for $8 million this year and then a team option for next year. He will almost certainly be looking for very big money as a free agent 2 years from now, assuming that his ratings don't completely drop off. I'll do everything reasonable and possible to try to keep Ortega with us for the course of his career, because he has had a fantastic career for us, and certainly, although the length of his career is not going to be incredible, given that he was a college player who spent a couple years in the minors before making his debut with us, he has put up a average of an 8 WAR every 162 games that he's played over the course of his career. And although he's unlikely to compile massive numbers over the course of his career because of the injuries and because of not really making his debut as an everyday player until he was 24 years old, still think that if we're able to keep him in the lineup for most of the next couple years, and then maybe, if we're lucky, bring him back, we can still end up with a guy who's got a 70 or 80 WAR over the course of his career, with at this point a couple of MVP awards, including last year's MVP, and turn him into a very interesting Hall of Fame candidate. But with that injury, probably will have someone who wasn't going to make the team out of spring training, at least be on the 26-man roster for a week or two, until hopefully Ortega is healthy and ready to go. And we've simmed forward another week, another serious injury, but not anything that will be crippling for the team, but the excellent young pitcher Ernesto, who was a guy that we picked up as a very highly regarded international amateur free agent just over 4 years ago, going to be out with a strained ab for 4 to 5 weeks. He only progressed as high as Double A last year, but he was a combined 9-3 between High A and Double A, with 2 WAR exactly at each level. Think it was unlikely he was going to make the team out of spring training, but he certainly was in the mix to be considered. With that strained ab, obviously he's going to not make the team out of spring training this year, and certainly will be having a rehab assignment in AAA if we have some injury issues. Maybe after a couple of starts in AAA we call him up. Otherwise, he probably gets a little bit of seasoning with Las Vegas before potentially being a September call-up for us later this year. And as we head into the final week and a half or so of spring training, our A's with a 12-8 record, one of the better teams in the American League for whatever that is worth in spring training games where we're not necessarily trying particularly hard to win or even put out our best lineup, but to get as many players playing time, some of them in different positions to improve their versatility. But still always better to win than to lose. Another injury, this one also serious in terms of the amount of time. It's a 5 to 6 week injury for the pitcher Juan Campos, but again, nothing crippling to our hopes. Do feel bad for Mr. Campos, though. He is a 25-year-old, just suffered a partially torn labrum that, as I noted, is going to keep him out 5 or 6 weeks. Former 4th-round pick in 2032, and at one point he was one of the better prospects in our organization. He has had some real serious injury issues over the last couple of years. Torn meniscus in his knee last year, which cost him the season as of early July. And then in 2037, he had a torn flexor tendon in his elbow that kept him out for the rest of that season, as well as the beginning of 2038. So between that torn flexor tendon in his right elbow and now a partially torn labrum in his right shoulder, probably not the greatest signs in the world for his future development. At this point, we think his potential is not even necessarily that of a true big-time major leaguer, but at one point we thought there was a real lot of potential for this youngster, but seems like the injuries are going to derail him a bit. That said, he still is throwing in the high 90s. There's hope that perhaps he could be a useful bullpen arm for us down the line, but he'll certainly be starting this year once again in the minors. Hopefully can stay healthy and get a chance to prove himself. And another bad sign in the injury department, our brilliant young closer, Chuck Huntley, who was the Mariano Rivera Award winner last season when he saved 36 games and struck out 83 batters with a 1.21 ERA over 59 2/3 innings. Going to be banged up for the next 1 to 2 weeks with a sore elbow. Supposedly he's day-to-day, but we are, given that it's spring training, not going to push him at all. We're going to put him on the shelf for the rest of spring training and then hope that maybe by the time we get to the start of the regular season, he'll be back at 100%. And the injuries keep coming, although this one hopefully is not going to be a major thing. Our excellent young starter, Trey, tired arm that's going to have a substantial impact on his throwing for the next week. It's Wednesday the 23rd. I believe opening day for us is Thursday the 31st. So hopefully we have enough time. Yeah, it is at Texas. So hopefully we've got enough time to get him back and healthy. Certainly would have been the favorite to be our opening day starter. Possible that that may get pushed back a day or two. And the minor injury concerns with our really good young pitchers continue. The 24-year-old Huntley banged up, as we talked about, the 24-year-old Sanaa, and now the 24-year-old Mike Blumenshine, who we just signed to a big extension. Sore shoulder for 3 days. We've got 4 days until the start of the regular season, and Blumenshine is just competing for a spot towards the back end of the rotation as a player who only has 5 major league appearances at this point in his career. But hopefully that won't turn into anything more significant. So certainly not great when arguably three of the top young, not even arguably, clearly three of the top young pitchers in our organization, our ace, our closer, and a potential future ace, all have minor injuries, but still arm injuries within a few days of one another. And we finally made it to decision time on our regular roster coming out of spring training. The pitching was made a little bit easier by the fact that we need to put our closer, Chuck Huntley, on the IL. I guess we don't necessarily need to, but he's been messing with that sore elbow for a while, moderate impact, and now his recovery time is unknown. So we are not going to fool around with Mr. Huntley. He'll join Ortega as players who certainly would have been on the major league roster despite injuries. Tish and Campos, certainly both less certain. Campos going to be out for another month, but Tish should be back from that torn elbow ligament that he suffered last season tomorrow on opening day. Likely will give him some time in AAA. So taking a look at our pitching staff as we get ready for this season begins, the 13 players that'll be going north with us. Jesus Saldana, Chase Dora, and Doug Weiss will be our 1, 2, and 3 starters once again this year. But a couple of rookies, 24-year-old Mike Blumenshine and 23-year-old Dave Baumler, going to get the opportunity to be our 4th and 5th starters as this season begins. Can see it wasn't a particularly impressive spring for Saldana, Weiss, or Blumenshine, who all had ERAs of 5 or above. The hope is certainly that they will be more effective once the regular season gets going. Hoping the same thing for last year's stopper, Mike Orozco, who's going to take over as closer over the near term while we're waiting to see what happens with Huntley. Daniel Blanco, who we signed to an extension this past offseason in a setup role. Alan Hunsaker, our primary, really our only major league free agent signing this offseason, is going to be a setup man. And then the lefty, Kevin Carmichael, who we traded for right at the start of the offseason, going to be a setup man for us as well. Jonathan Shearer back in a middle relief role for us. I think he'll likely finally get an opportunity to be on the major league team throughout the year. Mike Ross, left-handed pitcher, was fighting for a roster spot. You may remember he was the only player we picked in the Rule 5 draft this year. Do like his stuff, and he's been a reasonably effective pitcher over the course of his career. Also a pretty good influence in the clubhouse. So Ross makes the team. Kamani O'Banner moved to a middle relief role, but he's certainly a guy who could play a more prominent role for us if we need. And then Bobby Garland, the lefty who has been a swing starter for us often through the years, going to be our long reliever coming out of spring training. Probably would have been one of the lefties, either Garland or Ross, who wasn't going to make the team if Huntley didn't end up on the IL. I actually was inclined to keep Ross and Garland, although he would not be happy about this, and it's really undeserving given the way he's performed over the years. Does have an option year left, so was thinking about trying to put him into AAA. Don't know at 28 years old whether he would accept it or not. Coming off the worst season of his career, but he still has certainly been an above replacement level player for us over the years, and at times has been a pretty solid number 5 starter for us. So at least we'll get the opportunity to see what both Ross and Garland can do over the next week and a half to 2 weeks before hopefully Huntley will be ready to come off of the IL. Turning to the 13 players who are going to be headed north with us, and a couple of surprises here, although one of them not all that surprising given the injury to the outfielder Ortega. Jorge Mendoza made the big trade for him last summer. He will be starting his first full season in Oakland as our starting catcher, and he will be backed up by Hiretata Ogata, who we picked up in a trade this past offseason. Jake Bowers will be back as our first baseman, Juan Ramos back as our DH, Amare Alcindor back as our second baseman, and then Andy Toribio and Alejandro Landin will both be playing some third base and shortstop for us. Rodney Mesidor going to be in a utility infield role for us this year. And then the surprise is that Sam Lishman is going to get an opportunity to be a major leaguer, finally. He was a guy we picked in the third round of the draft back in 2029, so almost a decade ago. Wasn't even a regular player for us in AAA last year, but he was pretty productive in 193 at-bats, putting up a 119 WRC+. Pretty versatile defensive player, good influence in the clubhouse. Not so sure about the bat, the lack of home run power with pretty middling ratings everywhere else doesn't really suggest he's going to be a particularly useful offensive player. But he does give us a left-handed bat off of the bench. And we ended up waiving and DFAing Enulfo Dolan, third baseman who we picked up in trade a couple years ago. He had no value on the trade market, which is the only reason we waived and DFA'd him. Would have loved to have someone offer us anything for him. We'll see whether he makes it to AAA for us or not. The switch-hitting Dolan certainly could be back at some point if Lishman struggles in the limited opportunities that he'll get. But I don't think either Lishman or Dolan, or quite honestly, Mesidor is really in our long-term plans. We've got some good young infielders who are going to be starting the year in AA and AAA, and it's conceivable that by the time we get to September, some of them will be fighting for starting playing time in our infield, particularly if we have some injuries. Turning to our defensive players, Mike Alanis going to be back as our left fielder, although I think his playing time could get to be in a fair amount of jeopardy once Jake Ortega is back and healthy. Arturo Uresti back as our right fielder. Sergio Palomares is going to have an opportunity to be our everyday center fielder and leadoff hitter, at least until Mr. Ortega is back. And then with the injury to Mr. Ortega, Sam Gentile, you may remember we picked him up in a trade with Cincinnati about a year and a half ago. Like the speed, like the defensive versatility in the outfield, like the captain personality and some of the personality traits. The bat is nothing special, but he's a respectable offensive player. Put up a 140 WRC plus in AAA last year, but you can see he was brutal in the majors, going just 5 for 39, hitting a $128 for us in 16 games played. Don't necessarily view him as being a huge part of our future at almost 27 years old, but does give us another captain personality in the clubhouse. And similar to the situation that we're in with the infield, we've got some pretty interesting outfield prospects in AAA and AA, and want to ensure that those guys are playing every day rather than potentially being in a platoon situation for us or the bench situation that Gentile ended up in. So Gentile makes the club coming out of spring training, but clearly his roster spot will be in a lot of jeopardy once Ortega is ready to come back. And once Ortega is ready to come back, unless Mike Alanis gets off to a really good start, his playing time could be in jeopardy as well. And we've simmed ahead one day to opening day, which means that we've got 2 things left to do before we finish off this episode. Check in on our preseason predictions and check in on how the development lab went with the briefer programs over the last month or so. On paper, we're expected to have another big season. 101-61 record that we are projected to have would have us winning the American League West for a second consecutive season, having the best record in the American League for a second consecutive season. And if it really comes true, having the best record in baseball for a second consecutive season. So hopefully everything will work out that way. Ramos, the first baseman, who's actually going to be our everyday DH once again, projected to have a real big year for us. 273 average, 35 homers, and 114 ribbies. Interestingly, our defending most valuable player, Jake Ortega, does not show up on the top hitters list for this season. I wonder if he, with that wrecked physicality of his, suffered some significant injuries through the simulation. Jesus Saldana, expected to be our top pitcher, 12-10 with a 3.34 ERA. Steve Genus, projected to go 19-8, 2.86 ERA for the Rangers as he attempts to win a sixth consecutive American League Cy Young Award. Some of the top performances in the National League. Not surprisingly, Mike Ramsey of Atlanta, the brilliant two-way player, expected to have another monster year, 17-8 with a 2.59 ERA for the Braves. Offensively, some monster seasons expected to be out there. 52 home runs and 136 ribbies from Josh Paul of the Padres organization. And from Philadelphia, Whit Foster, 23-year-old, expected to hit 334 with 36 home runs and what I assume is a National League best 139 ribbies. So should be some very interesting seasons when all is said and done. Our old buddy Andres Rojas, the knuckleballer, now in the American League, expected to go 13-11 for the Yankees. So going to be an interesting season to get underway, but expectations are once again high for our Oakland Athletics. And ownership expecting us to at least reach the playoffs. That seems like a very reasonable and attainable goal to me. Some good news. Jorge Orellana, a young outfielder, was outstanding in his center field improvement program. So that's good to see. He's a guy who's going to be starting the year for Double-A. One of the guys that we kind of talked about. Probably not one of the top outfield prospects in our organization, but certainly a guy that looks like he could be useful. And the better defense should serve him well. Unfortunately, Luis Godina, another important prospect for us, poor results at second base. The young pitcher, Federico Arriola, he was a guy who was our sixth starter during spring training, improved his defense at pitcher, and he certainly is likely to be contending for a spot in the majors before the end of the year. Juan Pimentel, probably the top prospect in our organization, improved his base stealing technique. So that's good to see. He's going to be beginning the year in AAA. Only has 50 games at that level, but he was pretty productive last year. Given that we're so strong in the infield with veterans right now, wanted him to get everyday playing time, given that we still think there's a pretty significant gap between where he is and his ceiling and several ratings at this point. But he is a number 12 prospect in baseball, so certainly the top prospect in our organization, someone we may see soon. A couple of the young pitchers, Baumler and Huntley, no improvements in their defense. Blumenshine successful, improving his defense at pitcher. Modest improvements in a lot of categories, which is nice to see for a guy who hopefully will be starting over 30 games a year for us for the next decade. Arturo Uresti, successful at improving his defense in left field. Jonathan Shearer, no improvement at pitcher. Amare Alcindor, this is a good one, improved his defense at second base. Modest improvements in every rating, but still good to see some progress from Alcindor. Last year's rookie defensively, expecting big things from him as our second baseman this year. Danny Phelps, who's going to be starting the year in AAA, improved his defense. Jorge Mendoza, we're hoping for something from him at catcher, but no improvement from the veteran. Still gave it a shot. Importantly, though, Jonah Richards, an interesting catching prospect in our organization with an outstanding result. His arm and his ability rating both improved by 5. His framing also improved. So Richards, who we think could have a pretty interesting bat when all is said and done, really nice to see a nice result from him in the defensive program. Joe Peterson, another catcher, no significant improvements for him. The 18-year-old who we drafted last year in the 3rd round. An important prospect in our organization, but obviously a long way off. Darnell Selvey, successful in left field. He's another one of the young outfielders, 48th ranked prospect in baseball, former first-round pick. Only 23 games in AAA, so he's going to start there, but certainly looks like a guy who could help us in the not-too-distant future. Ernesto Comunez, the young starter, outstanding results defensively for him. No improvement for Nelson Delgado. A couple of second basemen, Jorge Castillo, who's 21 years old, going to be starting in high A ball with a successful infield program. Jorge Sevilla, 22-year-old, also going to be starting in high A ball with an outstanding result with his defense. And last but not least, Roscoe, no changes in his defense. So all in all, not a bad series of programs for us in the development lab. A little more focused purely on defense. I know some of you don't love seeing all of those pitcher defense programs, but there were a lot of guys who are pretty well established with pretty high ratings who had a low probability of success at improving in infield positions, for instance. So figured I'd try to help the team in any way possible, but a lot less active in the base running and stealing programs than we have been in some previous years. Not really much of anything in bunting either, so definitely a focus on trying to develop several major leaguers and then some of the better young prospects in our organization defensively over the last 4 or 5 weeks. And with that, we'll call it an episode. Got a lot of work ahead of me to try to get these minor league teams right-sized, get the right guys promoted to different levels, get the right guys to be forced into positions in our various starting lineups for us. So a lot of work ahead of me offline before the next episode when we will begin the 2039 season and our defense of our World Series championship against the Texas Rangers on the road in the Dallas area. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.